one and all. Myself, Mr. Keyurbi Shastri, Assistant Professor working at Vivekananda Education Society's College of Pharmacy from Department of Pharmacognosy, would here to deliver and extend my very warm welcome on the second day of Research and Innovation Ecosystem in Academics Need of Hour under AICT Training and Learning Academy, that is ATAL AICT, which is a 1 week online faculty development and 1 week offline faculty development program. This particular program, it aims into novel and recent trends in drug discovery, development, repurposing, and formulation. This particular program will definitely be very helpful to the faculty in gaining technical expertise, and therefore the knowledge from the faculty can be disseminated to the students with the contemporary and the current developments in the drug discovery. This particular FDP is emphasizing on the concept of innovation ecosystem and quality management, as pharma industry is growing rapidly in manufacturing, research. So this particular program will facilitate our young pharmacy graduates, and we will be able to impart right training and knowledge so that they will be able to grow with significant potential in the pharmaceutical industry. Today's session is on a specific topic entitled Sensitizing Teachers to Educational Methodology. This session will be delivered by our renowned speaker, Professor Dr. Munir Ahmed. Professor Dr. Munir Ahmed is presently working as a professor, Government Homeopathic Medical College, Bangalore. Also, he is an adjunct professor and director, Rajiv Gandhi University of Health Sciences, Academic and Administrative Training Institute. Sir has completed his MD Homeopathy from Babasaheb Ambedkar Marathwada University, Aurangabad, GCH from Karnataka Board of Homeopathic System of Medicine, Bangalore. He has also completed PG Diploma in Medical Education, University of South Wales, UK. And in addition to it, he has undergone through various education and training teaching technology.
College of Pharmacy. Once again, Professor Munir Ahmed sir, I welcome you, and I request you to now address the audience on the topic of sensitizing teachers to educational methodology. Welcome, sir.
Huh?
5,000 mutual fund
Is it, can everybody see the screen?
Yes, yes, sir.
And am I audible?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you so much. Welcome you all to this session on education methodology. Okay, this session is slightly different from maybe the regular sessions that you attend. In the regular sessions, there will be more emphasis on the content of specific pharmaceutical knowledge and skills, whereas this session is more focused on some of the skills and the skills and the knowledge which are required, basically required as a teacher. What happens here is when we look at any health science profession in the teaching, in the academics, we all come with our post-graduation in the specializations that we have. But when we come as teachers, there is no formal training that is given to us to be a teacher. Except maybe in the nursing profession, none of the health science faculties, whether it could be medical, pharmacy, it could be physiotherapy or Ayurveda, homeopathy, whichever it is, we all don't have any option or an opportunity to develop ourselves as teacher before we enter into the teaching profession. In this background, let me also share with you that in the Western universities, to be a teacher in any of the health science professions, they need to have an additional qualification of teaching. Unless they have that, they're not considered to be a teacher for appointment into any of these uh, colleges. So in this background, we at Rajiv Gandhi University and many other universities also are making efforts to introduce some sort of modules on educational methodology for the teachers, one at the level of teachers who are already in service, and also for the postgraduates who are in any of the health science programs. Like it could be M.Pharm, it could be MD, MDS. We have made one provision of a module on education methodology into our postgraduate courses. So that is what we are doing at Rajiv Gandhi University. And this, whatever you are seeing on the screen, the logo RAATI, RATI, is the RGUHS, or Rajiv Gandhi University of Health Sciences Academic and Administrative Training Institute, which is specifically for training the teachers in education methodology and also into leadership, academic leadership, educational leadership. So at the outset, I would like to thank Vivekananda Education Societies, College of Pharmacy, the management, principal, faculty, and the students for having invited me to interact with you, to share my understanding of education methodology with you, and also to the uh, apex body AACT for having facilitated this through ATAL FDP, so that there is some kind of sensitization that is given to the teachers about educational methodology. So whatever I am going to make a presentation today, is at a very basic level of sensitizing the teachers on what is the requirement of a course or a formal learning on education methodology, and what are some of the basic features that are there in educational methodology. And some of these are very familiar to you because as a teacher, you would be practicing some of these tools. What I am going to do is to give some kind of a background and understanding or a foundational understanding to the practices that you are doing as a teacher. So this session is sensitizing teachers to education methodology. The purpose is to orient teachers of pharmacy profession on the principles of education methodology as relevant to pharmaceutical education. After completing this, you will be in a position to reflect on the importance of the concepts of teaching and student assessment. This is very important. We all attend the programs, the sessions, and at the end of it, if you do not reflect on what we have learned or what was the content of the presentation there, then perhaps the usability of the session would not be that much. So reflecting on what we have learned is one of the very important aspect of any learning at any level. So I hope that all of us, including me, will reflect on what was the outcome of this session, what we learned in this session. So this ATAL FDP at Vivekananda Education Societies, College of Pharmacy, Mumbai. At the end of this session, you will be in a position to discuss the components of curriculum. This is the agenda for the session, the session agenda. At the end of the session, you will be in a position to discuss the components of curriculum. Then you will be in a position to illustrate what is called as a basic teaching model. The third agenda is you will be in a position to reflect the role of constructive alignment for teaching and assessment. There is a concept called constructive alignment. What is this constructive alignment and what is its role in our academic practices? The fourth one would be to recall the factors that promote learning outcomes. What are the factors which help us, which help the students to learn better? And finally, you can match assessment tools to measure the learning outcomes. These are the 5 objectives I have set for this session. When you look at these statements, the 5 statements, there are 2 things which are very common to these 5 statements. One, there are many other things, but 2 are very important. 2 are very, I would say, very commonly running through the entire 5 statements. One is, each of these statement is telling, it is asserting what you as participant will be in a position. It is not telling what I as a presenter will do. Whatever I do as a presenter is what you will do or what you will be able to do at the end of the session is what is the, in fact, this is what is the baseline or the foundation. Any teaching would have to focus on what the learner will be able to do at the end of the learning period or learning session rather than what the teacher is going to do. This I'll explore a little more in the further slide. The second important factor that you can see, common factor you can see is, you can see that each of these each of these 5 statements start with a verb, whether it is the word discuss, illustrate, relate, recall, match. Each of these is a verb, and what is even more important is each of these is an active verb. Active verb meaning you can see the student performing each of these statements. As against active verb, there is something called as passive verbs. For example, we could read that at the end of the session, you will be able to know the components of curriculum. If I use the word know the components of curriculum, at the end of the session, how would we measure whether the student knows it or not? Knowing is something very subjective. It is not objective. It's very subjective, and it is something which only a person who knows will know. How does a person who is external to that know whether the person knows it or not? Or, for example, the second, instead of illustrate the basic teaching model, if I had used the word understand the basic teaching model. Understand is something again very subjective, and it is a passive verb. How would the teacher know at the end of the session whether the student has understood it or not? For that, the teacher will have to create one more layer of assessment. As against it, if it was straight, like illustrate the basic teaching model, the assessment would base on whether the student or the participants or the learner is able to illustrate what is a basic teaching model. So these are the 2 common factors which are running through each of the objectives, and this is how the objectives or educational objectives will have to be written in as part of our teaching, training, or whatever it is. So this is something which I wanted to explore in a kind of practical session, giving practical example on how the objectives are important for teaching. When we say what are the factors that influence learning, this is one of the major factors. The writing of the objectives, the statement of objectives, is one of the major factors that influences the quality of learning. And let me tell you one more thing. Whatever objectives that you are seeing here also become the questions. If you want to check whether the student or the learner is able to perform certain things, how would you check? You go back and check on the basis of the objective that we have written. So the objectives not only state what is the direction for the learning for the students, but also they tell what the student should be able to perform at the end and how the student's learning will be assessed. So here the student is very clear on the parameters of his or her assessment at the beginning itself, Therefore, there is no fear, there is no uncertainty, and because of that, learning becomes even more good quality learning. So these are some of the features for objectives. We'll proceed with discussing each of these objectives in a little more depth. Before we go further, let us all consider this statement: learner is the focus of all educational activity. Because any educational activity, the teaching, training, whatever is happening, is for the student, the learner. It is not for the teacher, it is not for anybody else. Maybe many others are beneficiaries, the society could be a beneficiary out of it, but the immediate beneficiary of the learning is the student. Therefore, all the learning has to be focused on enabling the learner to be able to perform whatever the activities that we envisage for them. Now, how do we do that? By understanding who the learner is. The basic to any teaching learning activity, education activity, is to understand who is the beneficiary. If you look at any of the advertisements, each of the advertisement is prepared, manufactured, designed with the beneficiary in view. No advertiser will create an advertisement just for the heck of it. There is always something which is at the back of his or her mind by looking at who is the audience or at whom this product is targeted. No, we are not talking of the product, we are talking of the outcomes. So, whom do we expect the outcomes to be performed by? The student. So, you understand who the student is, what is their learning capacity, and what is their learning style. There are many theories, about 78 theories of learning which are there, but one of the most frequently used and commonly used, a simple learning theory, is called as VARK theory, VARK. What it says is the entire learning or learners can be classified under four categories, four major categories. One is, some of the learners could be visual learners. That is, some students have to see certain things to be able to perform. They can't do it unless they see it. And there are some people who have this ability to grasp once they see something. They can be categorized as visual learners. First V is visual. The second V is called as auditory learners. Auditory learners are those who can learn only if they hear something. Unless they hear something, the sound, the music, whatever it is, they will not be in a position to learn better. Perhaps as students, you would have come across some of your classmates who would read out loudly from the book, or perhaps when you do some kind of a combined study, some of the students or your classmates might have asked you to read loudly so that they can hear. So these are the people who are auditory learners. What we need to understand here is that not everybody has the same way of learning. There are people who learn better when they see something. There are people who learn better when they hear something. So here, just to break the monotony, if you see some of your students closing their eyes in the classroom, do not feel bad. They could be auditory learners because they want to hear better without any visual disturbances, just for the joke. Then there is one more category of learners who learn only when they read or they write. There are students you would have seen in the class when you are taking, they are uh, busy writing the notes. These are the people who can learn only when they write something. And there are some teachers who make it a point to tell, see, unless you write many times, you will not learn. You have to keep writing to learn it better. Maybe that teacher is a read-write type of learner. That is why he or she is expressing his or her personality to other teachers, other students. So what we have seen now till now is the learner could be visual, who have to see to learn things. It could be auditory, who have to hear to learn something, or they could be read write, who have to either read the book for themselves or write something to understand what is there, what is that learning. And the last category in this is called as kinesthetic or K, work K. K is kinesthetic, that is, these people can learn only when they do something. These cannot learn when they see something, not everything. The strength of learning is not by seeing or hearing, reading or writing, but their strength is by doing something. Let me give an example. You would have come across some student in the classroom whom you have, or you might have profiled as somebody who is very dull, dumb, something like. But when you take the same student to your laboratory or into the community and the field, the kind of work they do would amaze you, because you did not expect them to do such an amazing work uh, from a person who looked so dull and so unintelligent in the classroom. These are the people who might be kinesthetic learners. So understanding learners' strength is very important, because sometimes we tend to make profiling of the students by looking at one of the characters of them. We don't see what could be their strength. Sometimes we see only what is their weakness. So that we have to overcome. To understand who the learner is very important, because learners are the beneficiaries of our whatever education system. So WARP model is one of the methods of understanding how the learning can happen. Here, let me also put it on the record that audio-visual, auditory and visual learners, they constitute about uh, 93%. 93%, or sorry, 90% of the entire population is said to be audio-visual learners. And about 7% would be, and this audio-visual also includes the read-write for that category. And the kinesthetic could be something like 7%, and the remaining 3 are having some other special abilities of learning. So when we say audio-visual aids in our curriculum, in our education system, we are reaching out to a majority of the students. But still remember, majority is not 100%. As a teacher, your role is to ensure that each of the student is able to learn the objectives that you have set for them. If you say that, okay, 80% of my students have performed well, they have scored well, they have passed, that is not the goal of a teacher. The goal of a teacher to ensure that each of the whatever number of students who are there in your class or in your batch perform the objectives that you have set. Each of them can perform each of those objectives. That is what is the ultimate goal of every teacher. So for that, understanding the learner is very important. So this is one of the learning style of the students. So if you go further, all our students are adults or adolescents, and there are some unique features of adult learners. Let us see what are those unique features. One is, each of the adult learner come with experience. So when your students come to whichever class, maybe if they come to your even first year B Pharm, and if you're taking something like pharmaceutical chemistry as a class, or anatomy as a class, or physiology as a class, those students would already have learned something about that in their 10 plus 2, either in the biology class or in the chemistry class. So they already have some experience about or some understanding about the subject that you are teaching. That is one of the strengths which the student have. I'll come to more of it a little later. The second feature that we see in adult learners is that each of the adult learners have a self-concept. They know how they learn. In fact, if you reflect on the previous slide of WARP model of learning, more than the teacher, the student individually knows how he or she learns, even if they are not very, uh, conscious about it. They may not be conscious that I'm a visual learner or I'm an auditory learner, but they know what is their strength of learning, and they would have adopted to that style of learning. So, as a teacher, you have to respect their concept of learning. You'll have to nurture their concept of learning. This is the second point. One is, all the adults come with experience about whatever we are teaching or whatever they are into. Second is, they have a way of knowing how they will learn better. The third is learners will learn if they are ready to learn. Now, what is this ready to learn? If we take a very basic, crude example, you can say that learners become ready to learn when the examinations are announced. This is the reality. Or this readiness to learn can also be brought about by motivating the students about the importance of that topic or that learning, how that is important for learning. And this motivation can also be seen in the next way, in the next character of the learner, how the students can be motivated to learn. When you say motivation, there are, as you all know, there are two kinds of motivation. One could be intrinsic motivation, and the other could be extrinsic motivation. Intrinsic is something which is inbuilt, which is there within the, which is within any person, and we don't have to be forced or coaxed or scared by anybody to learn, either scared by examination or forced by whatever reasons contains to learn. This is intrinsic motivation. Our own reason is there. We want to learn it. The extrinsic motivation is some external force which brings upon some pressure for learning. It could be peer pressure because everybody is learning. I also have to show that I am learning. Or it could be examination fear, or it could be the context fear, like in a college everybody has to do these things, so because everybody has to do this, I am also forced to do this, though it doesn't come from my inner self. So motivation to learn. So how do we bring the intrinsic motivation? For any person, what is useful is important, and what is important is useful. It's very simple. What is useful is important, and what is important is useful. If you show the learning that we are providing to them is useful, is important, then that will bring about intrinsic motivation. For example, what they are learning is going to be useful for their professional practice as a pharmaceutical professional later in life, during their professional work. This will be useful. How is it useful? What is the relevance of the learning that they are doing now for their professional practice? If we show this in the objectives, the way we write the learning objectives reflects the relevance of their learning, the present learning, to their future practice. That will bring about intrinsic motivation. So writing of the objectives has one more reason to be more important. And the last one here is orientation to learning. All our orientation to learning is something which is called as holistic. So when we learn something, we don't learn in bits and pieces. Because when we practice something, we practice as a whole. For example, when a student has to make a prescription as a professional, there are many learnings or many parts of learning which coalesce there, which come together there to help that student to make a prescription or to deliver a prescription. So there, the learning is something which is the performance is something which is holistic. But when you look back, each of that learning component is something which is into either different subjects. It could be some part of that learning could be in anatomy, some could be in biochemistry, some could be in pharmaceutical chemistry, some could be in marketing, some could be in any of those things. So what we need to here provide is we have to provide a kind of integrated learning opportunity. So that is what is orientation to learn. The orientation to learn for anybody is something which is integrated, holistic. So as far as possible, we can prepare our curriculum implementation or syllabus implementation where it becomes something like a holistic or integrated learning. So this is about understanding the learner, which is very, very important. This is the foundation for any teacher. Because unless you understand the person whom you are going to interact with, we will be blind to uh, what is that we are going. Because we may come with a lot of ideas. Is it really necessary for them? That is what is to be understood. Now, to understand what is education, WHO has given a very succinct and beautiful, workable definition for education. What it says is education is a continuous process. It is a process, not a product, and it is something which is continuous, meaning it doesn't stop anywhere. It keeps continuing. It's a continuous process. What does it do? It has a goal or a purpose. The education as a process has a goal, as a chief goal, chief purpose. What is this chief goal, or what is the purpose of education? The purpose of education is to bring about desirable changes in the behavior of learners on a relatively permanent basis. So if we reflect on this much, whatever these 5 lines, what it says is education is a process, and it is a continuous process, and it has a purpose. There is a reason for this education. The reason is to bring about changes in the behavior of learner, and these changes have to be desirable. So when you shift from one position to another position, you have changed, and this change is what is seen as learning. Let me give an example. As a teacher, you would have seen some of the students, maybe rare also, some of the students who come late to the class. So initially you would have felt, okay, this person is coming late, let me tell, it is not advisable to come late, you have to come to the class in time. So you keep telling that student or students once, twice, thrice, 4 times, you have to come in time, you have to come in time. If the student comes in time, what is that you will think about that student? You say, okay, this student has learned. Why the student has learned? Because the person has changed the habit of coming late. That person is coming in time. So what you see is a change in the behavior of that learner. So that is what is learning. And if you see that some student doesn't change at all, I mean to say student is coming late every time. So you say, look at this fellow, in spite of finding so many times, he has not changed. So what is that change the student has not learned, you say? What is that student has not learned? How do you say the student has not learned? Because you don't see any change in them. Only when you see a change, you say, learning has happened. To reiterate or to underline this, I'll give you 3 examples. How do you see in education that change has happened? On what basis? Now, this change will happen when the student has acquired some knowledge. By acquiring some knowledge, the student, you can see that the student's behavior has changed. Let me give a very basic example. My own example, perhaps, or your own example. It could be a shared example. When we got into this first year of whichever health science course, and when the teacher was teaching anatomy, in the initial classes, maybe the teacher was using some terms like superior, inferior in anatomy class. When I heard this superior, okay, I felt I am superior because I got into this course. And my other friend who was sitting with me, he could not get into this course, so he is inferior. That was the understanding. Once the teacher continued teaching for some more days and understanding what is the meaning of this word superior or the word inferior in the context of anatomy, it brought about a change in our understanding or my understanding to say, okay, this is nothing to do with the superiority or inferiority of a person. It is about something to do with the relation that we speak in the context of anatomy. So that superior is nothing to do with being good, or inferior is not something to do with being bad. So why this change came is because of acquiring some knowledge. Because the student acquired some knowledge, there is some change in the behavior towards that word. My behavior towards the meaning of that word changed because I acquired knowledge, what it means. Right? Similarly, the behavior may change by improving the skill. When we are using, say, for example, when you are into the first year chemistry class, the way you use those equipments, the way you assemble the apparatus, the skill, you will be so scared of doing it. And once the same skill, if you are doing in the third year or fourth year of your undergraduate course, imagine what is the kind of behavior that you have, the confidence that you have, only because of the skill that you have developed in using or assembling that apparatus or using that a particular equipment. So improving the skill also brings about a change in the behavior. And the third one, this is very, very important, is developing an attitude. The development of an attitude is something which will totally change your uh, behavior. Say, for example, as a maybe second year student, when you start prescribing and when you start explaining to the patients how to take the medicine of your prescription, you are communicating with the patient. And when the patient is asking you once or twice, okay, you may answer. Grudgingly, you may answer. If the patient keeps repeating 3, 4, 5, 6 times, you may snap at the patient. Say, don't you understand? It's so simple. The same thing when you have completed your study and in your internship or during your final year, when you are doing the same activity of explaining to a patient about a prescription, even when the patient is asking 3, 4, 5, 6 times, you try to rationalize saying perhaps this patient has not understood. Maybe the way I'm using the language is a little more difficult for this person. Let me not use any technical language. Let me use some very colloquial language. So what has happened here is your attitude towards the same activity has changed. Why did it change? Because of developing that attitude or value. So this, in effect, is the gist of the definition of education. Definition of education, if you understand, you have understood the entirety of education because it gives you a complete understanding of what education is. And if you are stuck somewhere, where to find the answer for coming out of that situation. So, to summarize, education is a process, a continuous process which has a purpose, or a chief purpose, or a goal to bring about changes that are desirable in the behavior of learners on a relatively permanent basis. And this, the learners change happens because of one, acquiring the knowledge, two, improving the skill, or developing an attitude. So these are the, you can say, this is the definition of education. And whatever we build on further will be based on these things, this definition. Now to go further, when you say education, this education has, or the curriculum has three components. Before I go further, let me clarify to you because many people have this confusion about two words. One is curriculum, the other is syllabus. Curriculum is something like an overall nature or overall existence of something. Take, for example, a constitution for a country. Every country will have a constitution. So, the constitution of a country is like curriculum for a course. For example, a constitution of country tells who is eligible to be citizen of that country, who is eligible to become a legislative committee. Yeah, sorry. Who is eligible to be run for an office, who can become the president of India. All these are stated by the constitution. Similarly, for a course, say for example, B.Pharm course, the curriculum of B.Pharm course also tells who is eligible to get admitted into B.Pharm course, what is eligibility criteria, and who is eligible to teach in a B.Pharm course. What are the subjects that have to be learned in B.Pharm course, and what are the different semesters, and for each semester, what are the subjects, and how the examination will be conducted. All these things, the entire regulations of B.Pharm course are into the curriculum. Then what is syllabus? Syllabus is a list of topics which are taught, and the way you teach those topics, the way the students learn, and the way you assess them. These constitute the syllabus. The, the technical component or the academic component is syllabus, and the regulatory component is curriculum. So this is a basic understanding about what is the difference between curriculum and syllabus. Now coming to what are the components of curriculum, that was one of the objectives we had for this session. Uh, one of the objectives is, one of the component is learning objective. What the student will be able to perform at the end of the course is what is called as learning objective. So you state what the student will be able to do. Like we stated at the beginning, at the end of this session, you will be able to perform these things. So in the at the beginning of the course, at the beginning of the lesson, at the beginning of the class, you state at the end of this class, at the end of this course, the student should be able to perform these things. So that is called as learning objective. Now the second component of curriculum is the way you help the students to perform them. That is the teaching learning methods or media. You can see here the teaching learning methods media and the learning objectives are related, and these are related with this two-way arrow. The arrow is pointing both the sides. What it means is the learning objectives influence what is the appropriate teaching learning method for it, and the teaching learning methods are dependent on the nature of the objective. Similarly, once the teaching is done, you have to check whether the student is able to perform. That is assessment method. And the assessment method also is related to the learning objective. So the way you select the assessment method will be based on the nature of the objective, and the nature of objective will influence what should be the assessment method. And further, the assessment and teaching learning are interrelated. What it means to say is the quality of assessment, that is the outcome of assessment, can also speak about the quality of teaching learning methods, or how good or bad the teaching learning method was. So similarly, the teaching learning method will influence the outcome of learning in the assessment. This is called as the spiral of curriculum. So once you check what is the how much the student has learned, you can go to the next level of learning where the learning objective will be a little higher than what they already have learned. So this is about the three components of curriculum. So to go further, there's one more concept which is gaining a lot of importance nowadays. It is called as quality of learning. So in this quality of learning, there is something called as constructive alignment. Two words are there. Alignment is there, constructive is there. Alignment is whatever we are having as part of our learning in the colleges, it has to be aligned. Our teaching has to be aligned with our objectives or the purpose. Our purpose has to be aligned with the assessment. Our assessment has to be aligned with the teaching. Same way that we saw the three components of curriculum. And this is being spoken in a little more explicit manner. By you can see there is one Professor John Biggs from Hong Kong University. He has popularized this concept. Many other concepts along with it, and this is the basis for learning which becomes more aligned. So what are the components in this? The components for this constructive alignment are the same as we have seen in the component of curriculum. That is, one is what is the expected outcome, the learning objectives. Second is these learning objectives or the expected outcomes have to be constructively aligned with the learning activities. That is, the outcomes and learning object activities have to be consistent with one another. And third, to check whether they are realized,
हेलो
this has to be
हाँ
that is the
बेटा
assessment. Assessment has to be
नहीं साहब से
aligned
अभी
with
घर पे
both
नहीं
the
गए
expected
अब मैं आने
outcomes
का मैं बोल
and the
दूंगा
learning
आपको फोन करने
activities.
अथर्व
Let me
बोल
give
रहे
an
हो ना
example. Suppose you
हाँ
want
ठीक है मैं
to
बता देता
you want the student to learn
हूँ
what is the
बाय
normal range of blood pressure. The expected outcome is student is expected to learn what is the normal range of blood pressure. Now the learning activity here is perhaps a lecture which the teacher gives and assessment to check whether the student has learned this or not. One of the assessment could be there could be a multiple choice question, there could be short answer question, or there could be something like a Viva question, or any of these would be appropriate for this. Okay. So let me give another example. If you want to check whether the student is able to measure the blood pressure of the patient, of a person, the student is able to measure blood pressure of a person. Now, if I use the same lecture for this, would it be appropriate? Just because the learning expected outcome is something which is a skill activity, the learning activity has to be matching with a skill. Therefore, for the student to learn how to measure blood pressure, the teacher will have to demonstrate how to measure blood pressure. The teacher cannot explain. Teacher may explain, but the learning will not be aligned there. And if you want to check whether the student is able to measure blood pressure, You cannot ask a question in the theory or in the viva, are you able to measure blood pressure? That would not be constructively aligned. The constructive alignment would be to ask the student to demonstrate how to measure blood pressure or how he or she is able to measure blood pressure. So this is what is constructive alignment. And to take this into a more practical way, there's something called as basic teaching model. The basic teaching model is something which all of you are practicing, like how you teach, what are the methods you teach. At the beginning of the basic teaching model, you have the objectives or the learning objectives, expected learning outcomes, whatever it is. Here, what happens is most of the time, when we state the objective, the next step that we expect is perhaps to go and do the teaching. But this is not the activity that most of you or all of you practice. Before you start teaching, you have said, this is the objective, I expect the student to be able to perform at the end of this lecture. These are the things. Then, if you are continuing the previous class, what you will do is, you will ask some questions related to the previous class, whatever you have learned, whatever the students have learned in the previous class. Or if it is a new topic, you will ask something which is required to build on that. That is, suppose you are teaching something like how to measure blood pressure. You may ask something about some of the laws of physics or something of biology which is relevant to that particular topic, which the student might have learned either in the previous course or in the previous session. So the reason why we are doing is to relate the students' learning to whatever they already know. As we have already seen in the adult learning principles, every student comes with an experience and you build on that experience. And that checking that experience is called as entry behavior assessment. We check what is the behavior of this behavior in the sense we have already discussed in the definition of education. Behavior could be the knowledge, skill, or attitude. What the student already knows, what the student is able to do, and what are the values the student carries. These are the things which have to be checked before we go further into the teaching. So these are called entry, beginning, behavior, what the student already knows, the knowledge, skill, or attitude, and assessment, checking it. So once you do the entry behavior assessment, the next level is to teach or to facilitate learning. So once you facilitate learning, the final step would be to assess what the students are able to perform, learn. So here, this is what is called basic teaching model. Apart from being a basic teaching model, this is a formula for checking a lot of things. Like for example, if you want to know why some students have not performed well in a particular topic, or why a large number of students are not performing in a particular session or in a particular subject, you have all the answers here. This is a formula. The outcome is assessment. So once you get the assessment, this assessment tells if the student has not performed well, there are four possible reasons. One possible reason, or if the student has performed very well, then also there are four possible reasons why the student has performed well or why the student has not performed well. Four reasons. One reason is the teaching learning method is constructively aligned with the assessment. Assessment and teaching learning methods are constructively aligned. That is one feedback. The second feedback is that we check the entry behavior of the student before starting the teaching. That is, we made the student comfortable, we made the student to realize what he or she already knows and built on that learning or experience. The third possibility is that the objectives or the purpose of that learning was clearly stated and it was made aware to the student. The student knew what he or she was expected to learn. So the assessment was fruitful because assessment is based on the learning objective, what the student is expected to learn. So there is a constructive alignment. The fourth component or the fourth reason why the student might have performed well or not performed well is the assessment itself. If the assessment itself is not proper, if the assessment is not aligned with the requirement, then you don't have outcome will not be that very good. So therefore, if you want to check for the success of any teaching, success for any course, there are 4 reasons, and those reasons are there on the screen here. To move further, if you look at these heap of books, suppose you want to pick a particular book from this mess, would it be easy or difficult? Obviously, it's not very easy. The reason we'll come to that. On the other hand, if you want to pick the book from, say, from this, would it be easy or difficult? Obviously, it is very easy. So what would be the reason? Perhaps the answer would be that these are properly aligned, these are properly structured, there is some arrangement, there is some organizing, all these are fine. But why did this organizing, this structuring, this alignment, all this come? Did it come just like that? No. It came because there was a plan. It was planned. Because of the planning, there is organization. Because of the planning, there is simplicity. Because of the planning, there is alignment. So planning is very important. In fact, there is a statement, if you fail to plan, please listen to it very carefully. If you fail to plan, you plan to fail. Therefore, planning is very important. To make this word planning very simple, planning is what we decide before doing. If you do something without deciding, without thinking, then it is unplanned. If we think, if we decide this is how it has to be, then that is planned. You may decide 1 minute before, you may decide 1 hour before, or whatever the time. But the requirement is you decide before doing. That is what is planning. And in the context of education also, planning is very important. And for this planning, there's a very potent tool called as Bloom's taxonomy. Bloom's taxonomy of education objectives. Some of you might have heard about it. What it says is the entire learning can be classified into 3 areas of learning. One is called as cognitive learning, that is the knowledge. If you reflect back on the definition of education, if you recall the last 3 lines, the first of the last 3 lines said acquiring knowledge, which is cognitive. That is one of the areas of learning. The second is psychomotor. Psychomotor, if you remember the second of the last 3 lines, skill, acquiring skills to improving the skills. Improving the skill is a psychomotor domain. That is another area of learning. And the third here is called affective domain. Please read the word very clearly. It is called affective, not affection, not effective. It is affective, starting with A. So that is the value, the communication, and the importance of it. So any learning will have these 3 components, whether the learning is in the knowledge area, whether the learning is in the skill area, or whether the learning is in the value or the communication area. So to understand which area it is in, very simple. I'm not getting into very details of it. If you read any statement of purpose, and if that statement makes you to think about it, or to make a decision, take a decision on it, then it will be in the cognitive domain. If the statement makes you to perform something, use your hands, fingers, do something, then that would be in the psychomotor domain. And if that statement makes you to feel some value, and it makes you to speak to somebody, communicate with somebody, then that would be in the affective domain. So this is one of the tools for a statement of the objectives. The objectives can be written either as the cognitive domain, psychomotor domain, or affective domain. To give an example, you have some aim. Say, for example, understand the structural activity relationship of different class of drugs. Here I'm using the word understand because aim is something which is very broad. It is not specific. So here we can use even the passive verb, but some verb has to be there. So if this is the aim, what could be the relevant objectives under this? The objective can be 1. Classify nutraceuticals. You can see here, classify. If you have to classify nutraceuticals, you have to think, what is this classification? How do I classify? So you are thinking, therefore this would be in the cognitive domain. Then determine the swearing factor. If you have to determine the swearing factor, Just thinking what is spelling factor is not going to determine it. You have to perform some activity. So performing that activity requires some kind of working with your hands and fingers. Something you have to do. That would be psychomotor domain. And the third is explain to the parents of an infant how to administer medicine. So how to administer medicine is something which that you have to explain, you have to communicate. It is not something that you know or you are able to understand. It is something which you are able to convey, communicate. So this communication is where the affective domain comes. So this is how you can classify. I have only given some examples for you. You can maybe, if there is a further intensive learning on this topic, we can take a little more detailed discussion on this. Why are these objectives important? These objectives are important because each of these learning objective tells what the student will be able to do at the end of the learning. If you recall one of the earlier slides, we said learner is the focus on educational activity. To make learner the focus, we have to write the objectives where we write what the student will be able to perform so that it becomes learner directed. The second use of writing objective is it not only tells what the student will be able to do, but also tells how the student will be able to do. What is the quality of that performance? And the third is very important. What you see on the screen is a part of the railway track. Now let me complete this image, and when you see the image completed, you can see here. What has happened here is misalignment. Earlier we were speaking of constructive alignment. Here what you see is misalignment. Learning should not happen misalignment. Why this is happening is because the person on one side and the person on the other side do not know how the tracks have to meet. They don't have an understanding. And this is what happens in our examinations. In the examination, when the student is sitting, the student becomes perplexed looking at the question. Because the teacher who taught, maybe I taught as a teacher, thinking this is important for me, this is important for you. And when the person who set the question paper, also a teacher like me, would have thought this is important, and we have no communication with each other. So this happens. And further damage comes when the paper goes for valuation, where the person who does the valuation also has an idea or an opinion what is important. So how do we overcome this misalignment? This misalignment can be overcome, and we can bring in the constructive alignment when we state the objectives, and these objectives are shared among the teachers, among the examiners, among the evaluators, among the students. Everybody who's part of the academic system, education system, the student, the teacher, the examiners, the university administrators, everybody know what is the student expected to perform. Then that will bring about constructive alignment. Therefore, one of the major contribution or requirement of objective is that it improves communication. So these are what we call the educational objectives. Now, how do we relate the educational objectives into our teaching system? Into our teaching system, we have the teaching. The second component of the curriculum is teaching learning methods and media. Now, how do we select the teaching learning method? There are some parameters for selecting. One of the parameters is what is the student type. We already have seen the student type is could be one of the very simple classification is where the student could be visual learner, could be auditory, could be read and write, or could be kinesthetic. Depending on what is the style of learner, you will have to design what is the appropriate teaching learning method. So you may say that we have 100 students. How do we cater to each of the students? When you have 100 students, it is also known that 90% of the students are audiovisual. So your audiovisual approach would reach out to about 90% of the students. We are left with 10%. In that, you also know that about 7% could be kinesthetic. So you can have something, you can profile the students, you can identify the students who are not audiovisual, read and write, to identify perhaps they are kinesthetic, and give them support to learn by doing something. And for the other three, you can identify what is the strength. It's only a matter of 3%. You have to make some extra effort. And as a teacher, you have to make every effort to see that each of the student is able to perform the objective that you have set, each of the objectives. So student types will decide what should be the teaching learning method and medium. The second parameter is the context of learning. The context of learning could be in the classroom, the context could be in the laboratory, context could be in the community. So whichever is the context, you have to identify what are the appropriate teaching learning methods for that context. Say for example, lecture could be appropriate for a classroom learning context. Lecture will not be appropriate for a laboratory method. Demonstration would be more appropriate for a laboratory method. So you have to identify for this context what is appropriate learning method. The third influencer would be the domains of learning. We already have seen the domains of learning as cognitive domain, psychomotor domain, or affective domain. For each of the domain, there are specific learning strategies. So what are these specific learning strategies? Say for example, lecture could be a good learning strategy for cognitive skill. Demonstration could be something which is more appropriate for a laboratory setting, or for something where the student has to communicate. There could be something like a role play, which the students can learn better how to communicate. So the domains of learning will influence what should be the appropriate method of teaching learning. The third influencer is the size of class. Now the size of class could be large size, could be small size, or individual size. So the large classes, just like the cognitive domain, could be something in lecture. Lecture could be appropriate for a large class. A group discussion could be appropriate for a smaller class. Or self-learning, like for example, referencing in the library, or practicing, self-practice for a particular skill, could be for individual or for a pair learning. So the size of class also influences how the teaching strategy, teaching learning strategy has to be selected. And the fifth one is whether the learning is teacher control or learner control. There are some methods which are teacher control. Say for example, lecture is a teacher control. Library reference is a learner control. So for the context of learning, whether it has to be teacher control or learner control, it will have to be properly selected. Now, one more thing, let me also clarify here. These are not independent of one another. These will overlap. So, say, for example, for audio-visual type of learners, the context of learning could be classroom, where the domain could be a cognitive domain, size of class is large, and the approach is teacher control. So all these five will confluence for a particular purpose. So you have to see, it's not that each of these are in always exclusive. Sometimes one or two contexts it could be exclusive, but very often these overlap one another. So this is one of the influencer for learning, how the educational system will be influenced or impacted. And the other thing that you have to remember is the attention span. The attention span of learners is estimated to be something like 20 minutes. In fact, we are carrying more than 60 minutes. So your attention span would have gone off and come back maybe every 20 minutes for whatever reason. One of the reason could be the image that we are using here, the slides that we are using here, and the animation that we are using in the slide. That could be one of the reasons. So for holding the attention of the students, every 20 minutes you have to do something different. You have to engage the students into some other activity every 20 minutes, so that the learning does not slump down and it goes on and on. So the attention span of learners is also one of the factors that influences learning. A teacher has to be aware of it. Now we come to the last component of the educational spiral, or the constraint assessment. There's a statement that students learn what is asked, they do not learn what is taught. It's called Thorndike's law of effect. So this is very, very realistic statement. We all know the students are more concerned about what is the previous question papers. of the university examination. So you take about 5-6 years of question papers, and things will repeat from there itself. Learning is not happening there. What they are bothered is to clear the exam. There's some reason also for it, because our education system has become so much trapped into education, into examination, that the students cannot see beyond. And there's also some kind of a popular saying with some of the teachers or students, that what we learn is something different and what we practice will be something different. It's very tragic. What we learn and what we practice has to be constructively aligned, and that is the entire purpose of the teacher. How the teacher will make that learning more motivating. So how do we make that learning motivating? Is one, by reforming the assessment system also. So that is also one of the reasons why we have to learn what is the education methodology. How do we improve our education system, so that how do we improve our assessment system or examination system, so that there can be something like a washback effect or the backward effect to improve the education system. To understand that, you have to understand what should be the nature of a test. How should we assess? The first nature of test is that the assessment, the question, the examination should be directly related to educational objectives. So you write the objective and frame the question. The questions are framed based on the objectives. There is an interlink, constructive alignment of the objectives and the assessment. That is one. Second is, you have to test what is most important and useful. That is what will bring about the intrinsic motivation for the learner. And in fact, in the curriculum designing, we have an activity called as blueprinting of the curriculum. There we classify the content into must know, desirable to know, nice to know, depending on the relevance of that learning and the usefulness of that learning for the professional practice. So this is a whole ball game, which maybe perhaps if there is an occasion where we can discuss it at a more deeper level, we can discuss. But examination has to be concerned with important and useful matters. First thing is, the examination or assessment should be based on the objectives which are stated. Second thing is, these objectives have to be classified as must know, desirable to know, nice to know in the curriculum blueprint. And second, from the curriculum blueprint, the assessment blueprint has to be drawn, which classifies the assessment into the must know and desirable to know. So this is the second thing. The third is, the assessment scheme itself has to be something which is realistic and practical. Realistic for the teachers, realistic for the university, realistic for the students, and practical for the students to perform and for the teachers to implement and the university to conduct. If we have these three factors, then our assessment system, our education system, all can improve. Now, I'll at the end, in conclusion, I would like to present to you a scheme of assessment matrix. We have the domain. What is the domain? Cognitive, affective, psychomotor. And within the domain, there are levels: lower level, intermediate level, higher level. And for each of these levels, there is a medium of assessment and there is a tool of assessment. Taking these four parameters, I have classified the entire assessment scheme into this. You can see whatever is the table that I showed to you. In the cognitive domain, in the psychomotor domain, and in the affective domain. But each of these three domains, I will not get into the details of it. I'll only make a presentation that there is something like a very comprehensive toolkit for conducting assessment which is more realistic and practical. You have, say for example, in the cognitive domain, you have lower cognitive, intermediate, higher cognitive, and for each of these, you can have the medium of assessment could be written medium or it could be oral medium, and the tools could be multiple choice question, short open question, short answer question, or there could be assignment or viva, or there could be something like essay question or structured essay question. Each of these can be appropriately used for the different levels in the cognitive domain. Similarly, for psychomotor domain, we have three levels: lower, intermediate, cognitive, intermediate, and higher psychomotor domain. And the medium is performance. You observe the student's performance, and here the tools for assessment could be something like a checklist or a rating scale or a portfolio or a rubric, any of these. And for the affective domain, we have the same, you can say the tools. We have the lower affective domain, the intermediate and the higher affective domain. And there the medium of assessment would be either performance or communication. So you have some, you can observe the student performing something and check whether the student is being gentle, whether the student is being cautious. These are affective domain, or how the student is communicating in the Viva assessment, Viva form of assessment. So the assessment tools for psychomotor for affective domain would be same as the psychomotor domain, because the performance is there or observation of performance is there, plus the addition of Viva. So these would be appropriate. I could say this is a matrix of assessment for any assessment. This is the toolkit. You can pick and choose which is appropriate according to the domain, according to the level in the domain, and according to the medium that you are going to implement. With this, at the end of the session, are you able to discuss the components of curriculum? In fact, the curriculum components are educational objectives, the teaching learning methods, and the assessment. The basic teaching model is the one where we have the four components of objective, entry behavior assessment, teaching learning methods, and the uh, assessment, and the way we can use it as a formula. Then the role of constructive alignment in teaching and assessment. In fact, it has been something like running like a strand through the entire session. I have been using the constructive alignment platform to make this presentation. And the factors that promote the learning outcomes are the way we select the objectives, the way we write the objectives, the way we select the appropriate teaching learning methods, and the way we select appropriate assessment tool. And finally, match assessment tools to measure the learning outcomes. The toolkit which I used to express what are the uh, how do we select the appropriate tool for the appropriate situation of learning or the objective of learning. So with this, these are some of the references that I have used, some of the learning tools. If there are any questions, I can take the questions. And before I take the question, I should be thanking you all for the, uh, in fact, very patient hearing that you have given. Thank you all the participants, and all your families for having given you the time to take time and attend this session. And the College Vivekananda Education Society's College of Pharmacy, the management, the principal, the teachers, and the students for having facilitated this, and ACT for the ATAL FDP program for facilitating this. Thank you all. I'll stop sharing the slide now.
Thank you very much, Dr. Munir Ahmed, sir, for giving a comprehensive overview of teaching learning objectives, importance of knowing various tools in implementing these teaching learning methods, and sir has also highlighted on different types of learning like visual learners, auditory learners, and there are some learners who want to read or write, or there are some learners who are kinesthetic learners by doing something. Sir has clearly stated that 90% of the students fall under the category of audio-visual aids, 7% go for kinesthetic learning, and remaining category is only 3%. Sir has also very well explained the definition of education given by WHO, which is a continuous process, and its chief goal is to bring about desirable changes in behavior of the learners on a permanent basis by the way of acquiring knowledge, improving skills, developing attitude. Sir has also very clearly explained us the difference between syllabus and curriculum. He highlighted on various learning objectives, different teaching learning methods via what you can call it as assessment methods, different components of curriculum. He stressed upon constructive alignment, expected outcome once the teaching process is done, and what all learning activities are being implemented, and whether the student has understood or whether the learner has realized whatever is being taught. Sir has given beautifully the basic teaching model for facilitating learning, and he has given a very simple example that how alignment is important while delivering your teaching learning process, by giving a very simple example of how a student is interested in picking up the book from a shelf which is very well organized rather than which is kept in a very random manner. Sir has given emphasis on Bloom's taxonomy, wherein Sir has explained about cognitive learning, psychomotor learning, and affective learning. Learning is should be student directed, and it should give an emphasis from what to how. Learning definitely is going to improve communication skills in the student. Sir has also explained different types of students. Context of learning, it can be either in the classroom or in the laboratory. He has explained different domains of learning depending upon the size of the class, and either it can be teacher control or learner control. Sir has also emphasized that the attention span of the learners is merely 20 minutes. So the teacher has to keep on making some appropriate changes so as to capture the attention of the students. Sir has also given emphasis on different types of assessment which should be directly related to educational objectives. He has also given some useful assessment metrics under three different domains, that is cognitive domain, psychomotor domain, and affective domain. I am very much thankful to Dr. Munir Ahmed, who has given a very clear-cut explanation on the given topic, that is sensitizing teachers to educational methodology. There are some questions in the chat box. So with your kind permission, can we go ahead with the questionnaire?
Yeah.
Yes, sir, you can take up the questions, Shastri sir.
Yes, madam.
So there was a question with the difference between curriculum and syllabus.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that is a question raised by one of the participants,
Yeah.
Dr. Sunaina Gadgaonkar. What is the difference between curriculum and syllabus?
Yeah. The major difference is curriculum is the entire regulatory component of the course, which says who is eligible, the eligibility criteria for a course, the subjects, the, the distribution of subjects over the year, annual or semester scheme, how many semesters should be there, which subject should be there in the which semester, who is eligible to teach, how the assessment has to be conducted, what is the pass criteria, what is the rank criteria. All these come in, these are the regular things which come in the curriculum. So when you say syllabus, syllabus is the list of topics that you teach in each of the subjects. So for example, in pharmaceutical chemistry, what are the subjects that you teach? In chemistry 1, chemistry 2, what are the subjects that you teach? And further, how do you assess them? How do you teach them? So there could be something like a knowledge area. There could be something like a skill area. So what are the teaching methods for those things? And what are the assessment methods for those things? Even these come in the syllabus. So syllabus is what is the academic component of a course, and curriculum is the regulatory component of the course. That is the basic difference.
Sir, there is a second question from our participant, Itshri Vaidya. She has asked, can you please throw light on portfolio as a tool?
The portfolio is like you have a logbook. The students are given, uh, you can say, over a period of time. Say, for example, if the student are in the laboratory, they are posted to a lab. So in the lab, they have to perform some experiments. So those experiments are recorded in a journal or a record book. So that record book is called as portfolio. So when you have the activities, a list of activities is recorded. So that becomes a portfolio.
There is one more question from our principal madam, Dr. Supriya Shide madam. Sir, she has asked, syllabus completion is a main challenge in the semester pattern. So how would be a faculty able to balance while taking into consideration the attention span of a learner?
See, one very important thing we have to remember is a teacher is not responsible for covering the syllabus. Right, that is one thing. There has to be learning is also a responsibility of the learner. When we have made the learning objectives very clear, when the student knows this is what I have to learn, this is a background. Now, coming to the activity, in any learning situation, there has to be a 2:1 ratio. The student is a full-time student, not part-time student. Student is not from 9 to 4 or 10 to 5. Student is around the clock with whatever other personal activities of the student included there. So for each of 1 hour of teaching the teacher makes, the teacher will have to ensure the student is engaged in 2 hours of engagement. That could be in the form of some assignment, it could be in the form of some group work, it could be in any form, laboratory work, in whatever it is. This is a challenge for the teacher. So this challenge will be there for you to the initial phases, to the first 1 year, 2 year, whatever. So once you create this kind of a system where the teacher has created engaged learning for the student has the responsibility of learning and knows that whatever my learning is moderated by the teacher. There, the teacher does not have to spend the entire time teaching. The teacher spends the entire time facilitating learning. In fact, I'll tell you one more incident which happened very early in the way when I started this training in Rajiv Gandhi University, and incidentally, this was a question which was posed by a teacher from pharmacy faculty. The teacher said, "See, they had UG, PG, PhD, all the courses are there in that college." So the particular teacher said, in the initial phase of a training which I was conducting for 3 months, 3 months of training for the teacher in education methodology. So that teacher told me, "See, this is the problem. How do I manage with the time? You are saying that we have to write the objective, we have to we have to match the teaching method, we have to match the assessment method, and over and above, we have so much of responsibilities. Not only the academic responsibilities, but also the co-academic responsibilities, like some could be sports, some could be NSS, and these are college level. Apart from that, we have family also. Right? How do we cope with that?" Then I told, "Madam, you don't ask me the question now. You will give the answer to me after 3 months." And at the end of the course, during the valedictory, that teacher said, "Now I understand how we can manage it." The whole magic is how do we manage the time. And in the management of the time, how do we engage the learners and make them responsible for that learning without feeling burdened. The student should not feel that the teacher has loaded me with all these things without any responsibility on the part of the teacher. If the student knows that whatever assignment the teacher has given to me, the teacher is going to verify it, to check it, to look at it, and give me feedback. That is where the student will feel engaged and respectful towards that learning. One. Second is, uh, when we have the curriculum, we have a plan called as continuous assessment model, curriculum implementation and continuous assessment model, CCAM, this is what we call. And this is something which we have developed in Rajiv Gandhi University for all the courses. So what we do here is we strategize the entire curriculum of the syllabus rather for that semester into certain modules, and this module has to be completed within the time frame, and within the time frame is the responsibility of both the teacher and the learner to see that the completion is done. If suppose there is some untoward incident, the college is closed for some time for whatever reason, in spite of that, the learning will not stop because the programming is done where the student and the teacher are engaged into the teaching learning. So this is it's not a very simple answer. The thing is, we have to see that the portions are completed or the syllabus is covered. In fact, we can use the other way of saying syllabus is uncovered, not just covered like using a blanket to cover it, uncovered where the students can see it, right? So that is where you have to strategize using certain models, certain strategies which are proven in education methodology. And that is the reason why I say, keep repeating, stressing that having a course, formal course on education methodology for the teachers is very, very essential because it gives a kind of basic understanding. Like when you are working on some pharmaceutical formula, if the student doesn't know chemistry, how would they work on that? Similarly, this education methodology is the basic anatomy, physiology, chemistry for education, the academic part of it. So, this is how things have to be managed. We need
So
to have a plan.
yeah,
We
sir,
need
there are
to,
two more questions.
yes, yes.
There are two more questions. One is from Vedika Dadlani, madam. She is asking how to select assessment tools to balance different types of students in a class as a whole.
See, one thing is when you select the assessment tool, that assessment tool is selected on the basis of the domain, the level of the domain, which is common for everybody. And only when you see that some of the students have not performed in the mainstream, then you will go for some kind of a remedial teaching for them. So assessment tool is something which is common. There is nothing like for this person I will use this tool, for that person I will use this tool. The tool is used on the basis of the objective and it is common for everybody. And it is based on the matrix which I showed you earlier. Only after completing that activity of assessment, we can check if the student has not performed, there will be a remedial thing. And the assessment tool again will be the same. You will assess on the same parameter. There's no different assessment tool for different types of students. These are common, same. Okay,
There is one more question, sir. Kindly suggest which mode of teaching will be very effective in a classroom of 60 students, taking into consideration levels of learners.
okay. See, this is a very loaded question, and it cannot have a simple single answer. We need to have a kind of customization of learning because we don't know how these 60 students are. Of these 60 students, it is possible that all the 60 could be kinesthetic learners. It's possible. So we have to profile the student. First thing is understand what is the learning style of the student, the majority of the students, and uh, design your curriculum, your implementation, or your teaching learning methods accordingly. So for that, the basic thing is you have to understand education methodology in its entirety.
Thank you very much, sir, for resolving the questions which are being asked by our participants. Now, I would request our ICT team to felicitate sir as a token of appreciation and gratitude from the organizing college, BS College of Pharmacy. So, our ICT team is trying their level best to share their screen as a token of appreciation and gratitude on behalf of BS College of Pharmacy. I thank you, sir, for giving a very beautiful presentation and all the valuable inputs, which will truly inspire all the faculty members, and definitely it will bring a lot of change in teaching learning process. Thank you very much, sir. Before we conclude this particular session, there are a few announcements which I would like to make. Kindly fill the feedback cum attendance link, which is already shared in the chat box. This attendance link, it will be active till 10 p.m. today night. So please fill the same. Second announcement is recording of yesterday's session. It will be shared with all the participants by tomorrow morning. And please join our third session tomorrow, which will be delivered by Dr. Rukmani Kandaswamy, Professor and Head, Department of Pharmaceutical Technology, Anna University, BIT Campus, Tiruchirappalli. She is going to deliver on a very interesting topic, recent advances in nanoformulations. So day 3, it will be on 7th September, Wednesday, The session will sharply start at 7 p.m. and the joining link will be shared by our organizing committee members. Thank you one and all.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, Munir sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for the
I
informative
suppose
session.
the felicitation is coming up.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. It is coming on the screen. Yeah, thank you ICT team for sharing the felicitation on the screen. Thank you Principal Madam, Dr. Anita Madam, Dr. Hirlekar Madam, all the organizing committee members, Dr. Munir sir and all the participants for ensuring the wonderful conduction of session 2 of ATAL FDP under AICT and VS College of Pharmacy. Thank you one and all.
Thank you.